Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to the Courage to Change Your Recovery podcast. My name is Ashley Loeb Blassingame, and I am your host. Today, we have Betsy Ames, who is the owner of Mindful Style. She's a closet curator turned social worker and is currently working toward earning her clinical license to become an addiction-focused therapist. She's also a recovering compulsive shopper and alcoholic. She currently teaches others sustainable and mindful shopping practices and decluttering tips. She walks her talk and practices what she teaches. You can find out more about her by going to mindfulstyle.com/meet Betsy. I am so excited for you guys to hear Betsy's story. Compulsive shopping is something that I think many of us certainly have traits, if not full-blown addictions. And it is so eye-opening to hear about how our ism, I, self, me, how the addiction piece of our brain can grab on to anything. And I really think that Betsy does a great job of talking about that and talking about what she experienced and what she got out of the compulsive shopping. Really, really helpful. And of course, her alcoholism was incredibly progressed, and what she's done with her life and turned it around into her company, Mindful Style, is just amazing. Of course, I'm going to need to have her help me curate my closet, which is a mess. So, looking forward to that, learning sustainable and mindful shopping practices. And I hope you enjoy this incredible story. Betsy Ames, everybody. Episode 76. Let's do this. Betsy, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, Ashley, my privilege.
This is so exciting. This has been a long time coming, and you are very close with some people who've been in my family for a long time.
I am.
It's a small world and lots of us recovering people hanging around.
Yes, we need each other desperately.
Mm-hmm. So you are from back east? Are you from New Jersey or New York?
I am from Montclair, New Jersey, and now I'm in Denver. As I started to tell you, I've had quite a ride this whole life. But the last couple of months, I have been living in Denver after selling my house in literally 14 days after the lockdown started in New Jersey, and jumping in an RV with my youngest child who was home from college and driving across country and showing up on my son's doorstep.
Oh my gosh. And how was that move? What precipitated this sale of your home in the middle of COVID?
Well, I have been planning for the last 2 years to move out of the area. It's where I grew up. And I had decided on Denver about a year and a half ago. So the plan was in place, and like a true, I gotta have what I gotta have kind of person, the pandemic hit and I was like, I'm still listing my house. Let's just see what happens. Oh, it sold in 3 days. And then, how could I get across country? Oh, an RV. Let's see if there's any available. So it really was like my strong will over anything.
Yeah.
And it's the same strong will that got me into lots of trouble.
I relate to that very much. People would always say to me, if you could only use your determination for, insert whatever I was doing for good things, then you could get a lot done. And that has been the case, but it is determination in whatever direction it's pointing, it's determined.
Exactly.
Yep. So, and now you're in Denver, very different from New Jersey, but you love it?
I love it. I'm here starting a whole new life. I just graduated from Fordham with a master's in clinical social work, as I think you know, and I'm here starting a business and hoping to do remote therapy to people wherever, which I know you guys have been doing for years, hallelujah for you. And of course, now that is really the way to do therapy. So I get to kind of sit in this house and look at the mountains, but talk to everybody which is so cool. I love it. I love it.
That's awesome. So tell me, what did you do before? You said you're starting a new life. What did you do before your social work degree?
So I raised 4 children. I have 2 boys and 2 girls. The oldest is 28 and the youngest is 20. And that is what I did for 23 years, only that, after having been in the fashion business for many years before that. So here I am back kind of full circle, wanting to help people who are compulsive shoppers or compulsive buyers, or the un-PC way to say it is shopping addicts.
Right. Oh, that's the un-PC. Okay.
That's the un-PC. Just like we don't say substance abuse or we don't say drug addict, we say substance use now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways to say somebody who's over shopping. Yep.
Okay. So I want to get there. I want to get a little bit of background on you to hear about how you got into over shopping. How long have you been in recovery, for starters?
So I have been in recovery almost 17 years. On October 20th, it will be 17 years. And my story is so much like so many other people's. I drank, I got drunk, I fell down, and somebody told me, you're in really bad shape, you need to go away. And I planned the whole thing like I was going on a vacation. That's how my story begins. My recovery story begins. But going back in my life, I grew up in a household that reminds me exactly of Mad Men. My parents cocktailed and had cocktail parties, and it looked very glamorous to be a drinker. Yes. So that was the first that I learned of alcohol. But my first drunk, I got drunk, I blacked out, I puked. And, does everybody do that at age 14? No, probably not. They don't. And that was the beginning of the story of me, using alcohol to warm my soul. Actually, I just heard something really cool twice. And so when I hear an expression twice, I really kind of take note of it. So I'm going to say it the third time. And that is, somebody who qualified said that they felt homesick at home. And that's exactly how I felt growing up.
So were both your mother and father in the picture?
Both my parents were in the picture until I was 14. And, looking back, there definitely was something going on there, because they decided to switch from gin to vodka because gin was making them argue too much.
Right. There's just so much there. I love when I'm like, I don't even know how to start. Well, okay. So were you an only child?
I'm an only child from a second marriage. I have 3 half siblings from my father's first marriage. And that sort of is part of the story of how I felt different. Not only was I an only child growing up in a neighborhood that most people had 3, 4, 5 kids, and my parents were quite a bit older, but then my half siblings would come visit and they would say things to me like, when you bleed, you have red blood, but when we bleed, we're blue bloods. And, I didn't know what that meant, but I knew that it sounded like I wasn't as good. And there was something different about me.
Right.
And I definitely took that all on.
Yeah. And okay, so it's your father's second marriage. How old were you when you started? So what was when you started to go, oh, this is glamorous, these cocktail parties, those things, was that a thought you had at the time, or was it something you think looking back?
I had it at the time. I used to sit on the curved staircase in our house, waiting to be told I could come down and say goodnight to the guests before I went to bed, from probably age, 3, 4. And like I said, it was like Mad Men. Everybody was dressed up. They had their cocktails. There was loud laughter. There were hors d'oeuvres. My mother would hire somebody to come in and cook just for the events. And, it was really quite fabulous. If I look back on it, I would love to live that life. Yeah. But I didn't really realize what was going on underneath. Not only with my parents, but with other families. As a matter of fact, the first time I remember seeing a drunk person was at one of those cocktail parties. a very good friend of my parents was sitting in a chair and was like mumbling to himself. And I came into the room to say goodnight. And I remember going, oh my God, what is wrong with him? And it turns out within a few years, he got sober in the late 60s. And he was the first of the group to do that. But this gentleman was sitting there drunk, and it scared me. And I think I thought, that really scares me. I don't want to ever be anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is scary. It's scary if you don't know what's going on, or maybe even if you do. You decide, did you drink alone at 14 or did you drink with other people?
That first drink was at a wedding, that first drink and drunk. And, I did not just hop on the bandwagon as some people talk about. I kind of was like, well, that pretty much sucked, the end of it. But the beginning of it, wow, I feel warm and I feel likable and blah, blah, blah. And I did not pursue it particularly. I did get involved with a group of people who were pretty fast. Within a couple months after that, in ninth grade, I was still 13 years old, and I became a cheerleader. And this was a fast group of girls, and I dropped acid before I was 14 years old at a school dance, dressed as a cheerleader, and had a bad trip, and called my mother, of course, way before cell phones, and said, my stomach is upset. Will you come get me? And I went home and laid in my bed, not telling her that I was having a bad trip for another 3 hours.
Not fun. Bad trips. No fun.
And very young. Very, very young. So that sort of set me on I'm scared of drugs. And I might even be scared of alcohol for some years until I got to college. And, my story is so much about wanting to fit in and to be liked that I chose my college because where our mutual friends went to, because there were twice as many boys there as girls, not because of the academics or the location,
right?
Because there were twice as many boys. Because what was I looking for? Attention.
Yeah. Validation. Absolutely. And your dad had left, the man your life had left early on. What was that like when your dad left, and did that leave any marks? It
was really tragic. He did not move too far away. He owned a company, and he got involved with an underling at the company, and I would only see him 2 hours a week. When he would come to our hometown to go to church. Yep, going to church. Got to go to church, but, cheating on my mom. And then he would only see me for 2 hours when his drive was really 30 minutes away. It really wasn't. So it was really quite devastating to me, and I think to my self-esteem. And I was at the age where what I looked like suddenly became important. And I took the whole thing on as, oh my gosh, I'm not good enough. And boy, I need the male gaze. I need male attention.
Did your mom tell you about what had happened or explain to you anything? What was your story that you received about that, why he left?
Well, it wasn't until much later that she told me what went on, but I was a snoop and I went through her things. I knew something was going on, and I found a private investigative report that he was with a woman. And so how heartbreaking to me was that I'm sitting like alone in her bedroom reading this going, oh my God. But I didn't feel like I could tell her that. I was devastated.
Was she good about, or I don't know if good's the right word. What was her explanation to you, or how did she represent him when he wasn't there?
She was very good. Because now that I'm divorced, I know how hard it can be. She was very good about talking about my father. Matter of fact, I think they were going to maybe go to trial for the divorce. And she said, I will not let Betsy go on the stand because I would have had to, be involved. And she was very good about not saying bad things about him. And in the end, it was just his behavior that made it clear how he felt. She did not want to hurt me. So if she knew that I had gone snooping, she would have been so upset that I kind of knew what the deal was. So there was a really big hole in my life all of a sudden.
And now it's just you and her, you and mom.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What was high school? So you dropped acid, and that was the beginning of high school. What did the rest of high school look like?
I did not participate. I stayed away from drugs and alcohol really till the very end of my senior year. I kind of have a history of having boyfriends that are drug dealers.
It's a good way to go.
My first one was my senior year, and he was a drug dealer, and I was able to say no, no, no. And I really barely drank because that bad trip scared the bejesus out of me. It really did. But soon after that, I was away at school, and wow, it's like the floodgates opened.
Why date a drug dealer if you're not going to do the drugs?
Attention.
Right.
I'm sure he was very cool.
Yeah.
And I was getting attention.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, we're in touch still today. It's interesting. But I went to college and I kind of just started to let it all loose. And I tried everything there was. Yeah.
And did you get addicted to things in college, or how did college go?
I feel that in college, I started to drink every day. And, often it was beer, which I didn't really like, but just to have that feeling of being buzzed at the end of the day felt very comfortable. And there are two things I remember clearly. Once I got very sick to my stomach and I drank through it, thinking that it was going to solve the pain of the stomach pain. It was like severe stomach pain. Normal people do not do that. I was drinking vodka through it. And the other thing I remember is it was just around the time that restaurants like Fridays were opening up. And there was one that we went to in a town nearby because the town I was in college had nothing. Like it was drinking or nothing pretty much in the middle of the winter. And they served a martini in a goblet that was the size of like a dessert bowl. And I remember thinking, oh, I could do this a lot. And look, I won't have to keep ordering drinks. And then got in the car with a boyfriend then and drove home. And he had probably drank just as much, which is a whole other thing about drinking and driving in my life, which is, it's a big shame for me because years later I did drink and drive. But nonetheless, those are the two things that I really remember, that my drinking ramped up. I could never do any drugs without some kind of drinking. I tried all sorts of things. I got out just fine. People around me were getting out by the skin of their teeth. I mean, graduating. I still was way under the radar.
Right. Looking around and compared to other people. And that's a huge piece of so much of how we hide, is looking around and going, well, I'm not as bad as them and I'm not as bad as, and kind of comparing ourselves. Where are we? And for me, when I was worse than those people, I just switched the people around. So I still wasn't as bad as whoever it was. You just bring in the new lower companions. Your freshman year in college, there was an incident that I want to hear a bit about, a trauma. What was that, and how has that affected and shaped your life?
Well, it's very interesting. I was raped my freshman year in college in a fraternity, and I did not realize it until 10 years ago. I was in a situation 10 years ago that reminded me of this other situation in a fraternity. And I was not drunk enough that I was in a blackout, because I am a blackout drinker. I remember it clearly, but I pushed it down so far that it took, close to 30 years to come out, which is crazy to me.
So you had a flashback of what happened and it was, and the floodgates opened, but you had not remembered it?
I had a flashback about what happened. I remember walking away from it going, that wasn't right, but you can't tell anybody. Pushing it down. And then 10 years ago, literally seeing myself in the situation going, holy cow, that was rape. And I'm sure that added to my feeling that I was less than, that, my opinion didn't matter. That's another piece of my thinking as an alcoholic, that I'm not respected and I don't have a voice. And so crazily enough, it came back. I've only let it come back a little. I'm sure there's more work to do on it, but yeah.
Why do you think that that situation, why do you think that you, so let me back up. I've heard this story many times, which is I didn't realize what it was. Or like I realized I have friends who years into their sobriety are like, I realized that I'd repressed a sexual trauma. And I think that's a hard thing for a lot of people to understand. This traumatic event happened, who haven't experienced it. Two things. Why do you think that at the time it didn't register as rape? And how do you think that you were able to not just because there's some people who basically they don't register. They're like, well, this happened. And then there's full suppression of the memory. Can you talk a little bit about those two parts?
Well, I do believe that I felt that this person was more powerful than me and that I had to keep them happy, and what Storm would pursue if I said anything about it. And I do believe it is another example, and I know we'll talk maybe a little more about codependency, of me being codependent in a relationship where somebody does something that really is not, because I knew this person, is not appropriate, and me just shutting my mouth and letting it happen. And then it always later on in life would come out sideways with some other situation. So, and I do believe that it's the way I was raised. I was raised in a house where the man was strong.
Do you have a relationship with your father?
Both my parents are dead, passed away.
Did you have a relationship with your father before he passed away?
I did. It was, I would say, very stressful for me. A couple things. Myself and my half siblings, we would say we can't talk to him after 8:00 at night because he's going to be mean. And why was that? Because he would have had his exact measured drinks. It was very interesting. We could only have a certain amount measured, but it would still change his personality. And the other thing was that my mother had noticed for years that right before I would see my father, I would get really cranky and mean and kind of nasty to everybody around me. And it was this anxiety about what was going to happen when I saw him. I remember her even saying to my now ex-husband, before Betsy sees her dad, just so you know, I must have been like kind of acting out. She can really seem like she's angry and pissed off. So here I am doing that to people that I love because I'm going to see this person who left me, who made me feel badly. I allowed myself to feel badly, the whole 9 yards. So I did have a relationship, but I would say it was very strained.
Very strained. So you come out of college and you moved to New York City. Is this when you entered into the fashion world?
Right away. Got an amazing job in the fashion department at Glamour magazine. And my first shoot was with Christy Brinkley. I mean, talk about stepping in whatever, really, really good stuff. And I wasn't sure really how I got the job. I kept thinking I just must have been the right person at the right time. I couldn't even feel sort of the pride. But I will say that very quickly, boys and nightlife became more important than the job. And I was working with incredible people. I can go back through Glamour magazines of the early 80s and go, I did that, and it's just, it seems like I could not take advantage of having such a fabulous job. And I was drinking, I was out very late, and I was boy crazy.
I mean, yeah. I'm not sure. I think most people probably would have done that, at least for a period of time. But I think that it's about, we take it to that next level, right? I think that, you have this cool job. There's a lot of nightlife involved, right? I think there's a piece of it. You're young, you're right out of college. I actually think that many of us would be in that same position. I think there's this piece where when you're trying to fill a void that's so deep that there's nothing that's ever good enough or will fill it, what wouldn't be normal party, nightlife, whatever, turns into that. And we just, and it's like that with everything. We just pull it across that line, like something that would have been normal partying in high school or kind of young, but normal partying or normal experience. We just pull it right over, just pull it right over. And we do that with everything. And kind of what we were talking about in the beginning, which is, if we just it depends where this stuff is pointed. If it's pointed in a positive direction, we're going to pull it over that positive, goal line. And if it's pointed at stuff that's destructive, same thing. It just depends on where it's pointed. It's in us. It's a piece of who we are. How did you pull it over that line with the partying and when you were at Glamour?
Well, a couple of ways. The first thing is I stayed at 4 jobs for 2 years. Like I couldn't stay anywhere longer than that. I would get impatient and I'd want to move on, which is a part of my personality. And I think it is part of the addict in me, that there's always something better somewhere else. I would go out with a bunch of people and they'd leave at 12 or 1. And I was bringing the drug dealer home at 7 a.m. And funny or not so funny story, it was actually a job after Glamour. I went from Glamour to working on 7th Avenue to another small magazine, to Bloomingdale's, to fashion PR. So I really had covered all sides of the business. But at this one job, the small magazine, I had been missing so much work. I thought, I need to come up with a story. I need to make like a real reason why my life is so crazy and I'm sick all the time. So I went out and bought an eye patch, put it on my face, and came into work and said my boyfriend had beaten me up. And that's why things have been really tough for me. And these people believed it hook, line, and sinker. How crazy is that? I'm not even sure I really had a regular boyfriend at the time. The whole thing is let's do whatever we can to cover up what we really want to do.
I thought you were going with like glaucoma or something. Yeah, I mean, it's I was like, where's she going with the eye patch? I mean, it's crazy and it's not crazy because it's crazy it's crazy for people who maybe haven't felt that desperation to find a way to cover up this thing that we're doing that we don't really have control over. But if you put it in any other terms, like, protecting your child or protecting something you care about or a necessity or food or, the same parts of your brain that are affected by addiction are, other like sleep and eating and, those vital parts of ourselves that we need in order to survive. Well, addiction affects those parts of our brain. So to me, when I think about it, sure, is that crazy? I mean, yes, in the context of normal people, absolutely. But in the context of you have this drive, need, desire, compulsion that affects the same part of your brain that protects all your vital signs, all your vital functions, that you would do something that got people away from that. It makes total sense, right? It makes total sense when, even, it sounds crazy, but then you look at it from the aspects of, addiction, of neuro, the way that your neurobiology is reacting to what you're doing. All of that makes sense to me. So you found a way, an eye patch, which frankly it's pretty low cost. That's a pretty easy. I was thinking like, okay, well, she's gonna get a bill for chemo or like I'm like, oh, an eye patch, duh. Like that's my problem is like you are like, I know I can take care of this problem with an eye patch and a story. Unfortunately, I have the tendency to come up with like, I'll injure myself, like I have to, I just take everything, just even the things that are too far to begin with, I just continue to take them too far. But yeah, that's the kind of stuff that we do in order to protect what we have going on. When you did that, did you have feelings of shame and remorse? And did you think to yourself, oh my gosh, I think there's something wrong?
Interestingly, I really did not. I mean, I was so committed to this life that I was leading, this double life, like the good girl going to work during the day and then out, doing insanity at night, that at the time it seemed all very reasonable. But when I got sober years later and I look back at my story, I was like, what the who would go out of their way and think of something that sounded traumatic, but it, and it was caused by somebody else.
Right. Totally.
So it wasn't my fault.
Totally.
It was somebody else had done it. And, no, I didn't.
I call this addict logic. And I love, in my story, I can go through all my, addict logic. And I had some amazing addict logic. I mean, addict logic really brings me deep joy. Just going through the list of things, it's hysterical. I mean, it's, once you're kind of through it, right through but you look back, you're like, no, I actually really believed in whatever, this particular addict logic was. I hook, line, like not only did they believe it, but I believed it. Or not only did they not believe it, but I definitely did believe it. Really, really bought into my own bullshit.
Yeah. Well, I did anything. And it also got me attention, because that's part of this pattern that I have. I call it like the poverty of the soul. It's like there's something so missing in me that, oh, were you okay? Is everything all right? And yeah, and somehow it just seemed like it was an okay thing to do. And so I was out all night long, many, many nights, and it did not feel good at all. Lying, it was a double life.
Was your husband a drug dealer?
No, he's the first one.
You're like, he's not a drug dealer, I'm going to marry him.
Thank God. He wasn't a drug dealer. He was doing really, really well on Wall Street when I met him, but he drank like I did. He did. And we would have a couple cocktails and a bottle of wine every single night, pretty much. And at this point, I now had a strong feeling that I was not able to stop. Like, whatever was happening at the end of the day, I was always like, oh, do we have any wine left? To him. And if not, I'd pick it up. Or is there any vodka left? Like, it became my goal. I was working during the day just to work, to do something. But my goal was to have that amount that I needed every single night. And he was just fine with it.
Stay tuned to hear more in just a moment. Hi, it's Ashley, your beloved host. When I'm not hosting the Courage to Change a Recovery podcast, I'm running the recruiting department at Lion Rock Recovery. We are always looking for amazing licensed mental health counselors, along with various other sales and operations positions that pop up from time to time. The Lion Rock culture is one of collaboration, support, and flexibility. Our employees work from home offices all over the country, utilizing technology to connect to one another. We are always hiring. So if you want to have the best job ever, check out our open positions and apply at www.lionrockrecovery.com/about/careers. And, he's doing well on Wall Street. So you maybe were able to recreate some of that fancy that you grew up with. Yeah.
So fancy. We went to 5-star dinners, a couple times a month. We were out with friends. I can't even tell you the restaurants that I've been to that I probably left almost in a blackout, because I was a blackout drinker. That first time at age 14, I blacked out, and not every time since, but if I had a certain amount, I would not remember.
And when did you start having children?
So I really wanted to leave the city. It was the late 80s, early 90s. There were a lot of homeless people. I was working at Bloomingdale's and walking to work through Central Park. And I just started to go, I'm hungover in the morning and I cannot look and smell and see what I see. let's move to New Jersey. And I put a full court press on that one. Let's move to New Jersey and let's have kids. And it happened. It happened within a year. We moved to New Jersey. We were still drinking every night, and I got pregnant and I had a miscarriage, and that really freaked me out. I had been my mother's only live birth. She had 7 miscarriages. So my brain went, oh my God, same thing's going to happen to me. And you know what? I stopped immediately and actually pretty quickly got pregnant. And then I started having kids, and I just spit them out. 2 years apart.
20 to 28.
Yes. 28, 26, and 24. And then there was a 4-year gap between the 24 and the 20-year-old. And that became my life, but I still was drinking every night. Not as much, because I have to tell you, and I know you don't know this because you've been sober longer than you've had your kids, waking up with a hangover with young children, you want to shoot yourself, you want to shoot them, it is horrendous.
I can't even imagine. I mean, it's bad enough being sober.
Yeah. So I did kind of lay off of it because I think my next compulsion was having these kids and taking care of them. But I did make a couple of forays into I'll tell you, I was raised a WASP, a Protestant. And when my kids were old enough to go to Hebrew school, we started taking them to a temple. And I decided several years into that I didn't fit into the temple unless I was Jewish. So I converted to Judaism. I truly believe to fit in. Now, there's some things, I won't go into the religious aspect of it, but I was able to look at Judaism as a great religion. But I really think that I felt my husband's family was Jewish. Many of our friends were Jewish, that if I did this, I would fit in better. Okay. So maybe I wasn't drinking as much. Now I was becoming a Jew. And years earlier, I'd done EST. And I'd done all these different spiritual programs. What's going to make me fit in? How am I going to feel better?
Right. It's that never ending void, and whatever will fit at that point in time is what we will do. So you're drinking every night. You're drinking less because of the kids. Do the kids, they maybe have retrospect, but do the kids notice any of this, or do the kid, what's the relationship with you and what are you like as a mom at that point?
Well, I didn't fall apart until I had my 4th child. I was keeping it together, drinking, but keeping it together, I would say. Right after she was born, I said to my husband, I had her with no drugs. Yeah, it was lovely. And I said to my husband, I need a bottle of champagne. And he responded back, okay, I'll pick one up. And I said, no, I need a bottle of champagne for me. Can you please get me my own bottle of champagne? Because at the end of the pregnancy, for the first time, I had started to urge and have thoughts of drinking. And I had never felt that before with the first 3 kids. So he goes out and gets me a bottle of champagne, and I have my own bottle. I don't even remember what he drank, but I was like, I don't care what you drink. I hate this. And it started me on this 3.5-year run that ended up with me getting sober. So that was April 2000, and I got sober in October 2003. And my drinking would get earlier and earlier. I went to a psychiatrist because I was drinking so much during the day. I would wake up in the middle of the night with the shakes. And of course, didn't tell the psychiatrist I'm drinking so much, and she gives me Xanax. So here in the evenings, I'm drinking and taking Xanax. And it was a mess. When I qualify, I like to start with what my days at the end of my drinking were like, because it really is so important for me. And I'll just do it really quickly. I would wake up at 6:30 or 7 in the morning as the kids were getting up and look under the bed to see if there was a bottle there. If there wasn't, I'd go searching in one of my closets. I'd take a slug of whatever it was, red wine, vodka. If it was Mike's Hard Lemonade, I would sometimes buy that and say, oh, that'll be my breakfast, because at least there's juice in it. It's food-like. And I would take a slug, I would throw up immediately, and I would take another slug. And I would get my kids ready for school. I did have a live-in helper, quite ironically. And I think because she was there, I could go down the tubes much quicker. And I would stick the kids in the car and drive them to school. And I was already on my way into a brownout and then a blackout. And my day was spent getting rid of the bottles, shopping, and buying new liquor in, you know, how we have this crazy thing where we think we can't go to the same liquor store time after time. Like they're like, just give us the money, you know,
Yeah,
the
totally.
people who own the stores, they could care less.
Yeah.
But, you know, I have some kind of something that is holding me together that God forbid you see me buy, you know, 2 days in a row, my vodka. So by the last year of my drinking, I would drop them at school and several days a week go off to the mall, probably after I've gotten rid of the bottles in a dumpster behind some store, and would go into, we lived near quite a famous, very upscale mall, and would go into a restaurant and order a shot when they opened at 12, down a shot, and go shopping. And I would buy, can I have 2 pairs of those, 2 pairs of these? I was in Neiman Marcus. I was in Saks. I was in Bloomingdale's. I mean, total financial insanity.
So was that like the feeling of winning at a slot machine? Like if you got 2, yeah. So it's very similar.
It was, I can explain it as similar to when you know you're going to be able to drink when you're an alcoholic or do your drugs. Like you're on the way to the liquor store and you're kind of like you get ramped up and you're excited about it. I was excited going shopping. I felt like I had some superiority if I could say, hey, give me 2 pairs of Manolo Blahniks. I mean, this is going back into my psyche. I don't remember really feeling these things in the moment, but I've had to analyze it pretty carefully. So it seemed like I was rich, I was cool, I was all the things that I thought I wanted to be. And I was accepted because a lot of times, you know, I was still watching what was going on in fashion, or we were going out to fancy dinners or to even Temple, and I would see the newest pocketbook and I'd be like, I have to have that. And it became an obsession until I had it. But I drank before I did it too. So hand in hand, I was just making myself what I thought look glorious and feel glorious every day until the shit just completely fell apart, of course. Yeah.
What did that, so 2 parts, what did that look like and how was your husband, what was his response to the spending, the drinking, what was he seeing or not seeing?
So he caught on about 1.5 years into my drinking. And for some period of time, he'd come home from work at night and we'd have a huge argument where he'd say, you're drinking, you're drunk, you have to stop this. And I'd say, no, you know, I'm not. Why would you think that? I mean, at this point, I'm hiding the bottles. Like if there was a bottle of wine in the refrigerator, I wasn't drinking from that. I was drinking from the bottles, you know, under my bed or in my closets and so we'd have a big fight. And he would see the bills. We would argue about that too. But what then happened is I realized, I can stop that from happening. I'm just going to open up other credit cards. So my other goal on a daily basis was to get the mail before he could get the mail, particularly on the weekends, so that I could pull out the credit card bills that I had open that he didn't know I had. And honestly, I don't even remember how I had gone to my mom. My mom was giving me some money. And she had never asked me any questions about it. So I'm hiding the liquor. I'm hiding the shopping because when I get home, I would just shove the bags we had a house that had quite a few closets and they're all filled with my stuff. In the way back, particularly, I would, shove the stuff in the back of the closet. And then I was hiding the credit card bills. It was pretty ugly.
What did it look like when that all came to a head?
So that came... Actually, I'll take a step back. My husband heard about Al-Anon and he started to go to Al-Anon religiously 3 times a week.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And got really silent.
Uh-huh.
And that scared me more than the yelling and the fighting. Because all of a sudden he wasn't saying a word. And I kept thinking, oh my God, he's going to have an intervention and he's going to bring my family and his mother is going to be there. And my mother-in-law is going to be telling me I'm a drunk, and I can't have that happen to me. So I did have this fear in the back of my brain in my last days of drinking. He stopped yelling at me about the money and the drinking. I had a small car accident outside of this mall that I would go to frequently. And I had to call the police to come, and they came. Before they came, I had been drinking during the day. I had one of my bottles with vodka in it, like a sports bottle. And I realized, oh my God, the police are coming. I better get my act together. I had two of my kids with me, and I stuck this bottle behind a tree. My car had to be towed. The police asked me many questions. I can only think that my adrenaline was just coursing through my body, and that's why they had no idea that I was drunk, and I was chewing a big wad of gum. And my husband had to come and get me, and as we were leaving that parking lot in that mall, my son said to me, "Oh, Mommy, your sports bottle is over there behind the tree. Don't you want it? Should we stop and get it?" And a pall came over me, and I realized, holy crap, that is filled with vodka. And I am leaving that there. And I needed it so much that I had to hide it from the police. It probably caused the accident. And I kind of call it my first God moment, where I realized that I was very sick. I was very sick. Yeah.
And so your husband starts going to Al-Anon. Do you know he's going to the meetings?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so now
I do. But I was sort of like, oh, good, get out of the house.
Yeah.
I can, drink a little fiercer for the next hour and a half because I was constantly hiding.
Did you get sober before or after you guys split up?
I got sober quite a bit before. So the other kind of interesting thing about my story, at least to me, is that I had that accident on one Monday. A week later on a Monday, I fell on my bathroom floor in the middle of the night. They thought I had a brain bleed. I was brought to the hospital. My husband, who never woke up for anything, thought there was an earthquake, found me on the floor. I do have low blood pressure, but God knows what I drank that day. And I was whisked off in an ambulance, and they had to do a CAT scan, I guess it was, to see what was going on in my head, but I couldn't stop throwing up because I had such a bad concussion. And as soon as they'd say, okay, don't move, I'd throw up again, and they'd have to start it over. And this went on it felt like a couple of hours. And sometime during that process, I said, God help me. This is not how I want to die. So this was a week later on a Monday, and my sober date is the next Monday, the third week in October 20th, because what had happened between the time of the accident and getting sober, I knew somebody who I thought was in AA, and I went to her and I said, I'm really, really sick. And she said, let's go to meetings. But, the meetings were at night and I was showing up wasted. And she said to me, I think you might have to go away. And then that was when I was like, oh, good. I get to go on a vacation. Let me pick a good rehab. I mean, I literally took it on as a job to find a rehab, and I did. I was lucky enough to find one, and I was lucky enough, to follow the program. What I say about sobriety is that I just have had to practice it every day, just like it is like an instrument. You want to learn guitar, you practice every day. You practice your sobriety every day. But to go back to your question, we broke up 7 years later. We got divorced 7 years later. So we were together for quite a while. Did you stop your compulsive shopping when you got sober? No. I still shopped for about 2.5 years. I realized, so the shopping, I didn't have to be drunk to do the shopping. So it became clear that I could separate the two. The shopping was still filling me up, and making me feel like I look good or I own the things that I needed to own to be an okay person. And I did realize, though, that the lying about the credit cards was pretty bad. And one of the major theses of AA, because that's how I got sober, was honesty. And I was not being honest. And it was interesting that my husband didn't question. I think he was so relieved that I wasn't drinking that he didn't really question the shopping. But, in the meantime, he never had really pulled out all the stops to get me to stop doing anything. And that was because he had his own issues at the same time. And I'm sure it felt like, oh my God, if she really stops, then I'm going to have to stop too. So we broke up 6 years later and got divorced 7 years later. And I was able to stop the shopping, particularly after someone had said to me, our house at the time was on the market, and a friend from AA was one of the brokers that went through the house. And I saw him at a meeting a couple days later, and he said, did you realize you have 30 different colored sweaters lined up in your closet? And I just hit me, oh my God, that is an insane amount. Who would ever wear 30 sweaters, different colors? I felt incredible shame. And it was like another God moment. It was like God was speaking to me. What are you doing, Betsy? And I think particularly because it was somebody that I knew understood me because they were in AA, that I could really hear what they were saying. And that was the beginning of the end of my shopping too.
Do you think that people, I could see people thinking, oh, well, I can't have a shopping addiction because I don't have that kind of money. And I wonder how having money plays into a shopping addiction, and if that's something that people, I know the answer, but if you could talk a little bit about shopping addiction without money.
Sure. Money does not necessarily play into shopping addiction, because credit card companies, for one thing, will give you a credit card for anything. A matter of fact, when I closed my last credit card down, I had to beg them to take me out of the system, because as I had learned, they would come back to me in a year and offer me a new credit card. So first of all, if you can start getting credit, you can get lots of credit in general. But the other thing is, you don't have to necessarily be buying fancy clothes like I was to have a compulsive buying disorder. It could be at the supermarket. It could be at the dollar store. It is the feeling that when you buy something that you feel better, and it is something you compulsively need. So it could be 100 red balls if you're obsessed with red balls from the dollar store. But there really comes a point where you can't even use all the things you're buying. And then as soon as you're done with the transaction and you have it home, you often don't care what it is or where it is. My things were still stuffed into bags, tags on them. It was that action of purchasing that gave me such a high. Then I would even have so many clothes I didn't know, what was what. And we'd be going out at night and I'd be like, oh my God, where's this? I know I have it somewhere. And it would take me hours to find something. So it was that action of actually purchasing that made me feel whole.
What did your children, so you've had some time to talk to your children about, what they've experienced, what they saw, when they tell you about their experience with you, and this kind of plays into also I know you listened to Melinda's episode and had some feelings around ACA stuff, but when you talk to your children, what was their experience, or what were they saying at the time? Or, have they given you interesting insight?
They have. The oldest child remembers the most. He remembers mommy and daddy arguing many nights, and he said he would cry himself to sleep, which just, strikes me as I can't even believe I was doing that, along with drinking and driving. They were not aware that I was drinking and driving. So he remembers the most. The middle two The older girl says she remembers I would read to her and fall asleep in bed. And then like she couldn't move me. She couldn't get me up, which was me passing out. The third child does not remember. And Carly, my youngest, really doesn't remember anything because, you know, she was 3.5 when I got sober and I'd had somebody helping me in the house. But that oldest child does remember one evening that we were driving home from a restaurant and I said to him, I'm getting sleepy. And it really scared him. And I think that evening I may have taken part of his Xanax and was drinking and was driving. And, you know, this is my biggest shame. This is really the biggest thing for me to get over. I think I've done a lot of work on it, but when I hear about people drinking and driving, I'm just a shambles. I really am. So in terms of the shopping, I've never actually asked them if they were if they realized that their closets were filled with my things too. So I'm going to have to go there. That is really actually a great question. When I was newly sober and I was going to meetings, I would tell them that I had assorted other things to do because I wasn't ready to tell them that I had gotten sober. So they've said a little. They have been to celebration meetings, and I've seen them all cry when I've talked about the end of my drinking and what life is like now. So, yeah.
Do they ever ask you to talk to their friends or people that they know? Or
you know, not yet, but I do think that they are cautious talking about how much alcohol is drank, especially when they were in college. Now, Carly, the youngest, is still in college. They have not asked me to do that. And, you know, I have to say that when it comes around to the time of my anniversary, they always say how proud they are of me. And they all enjoy drinking too. So it's not like they don't do it around me. But I would say that they are cautious, and they often, when they were a little younger, wouldn't come home if they'd been drinking. They'd stay at a friend's house, which always made me feel better. Do not ever drive. But I think that I have a different relationship with them than lots of parents in the town they grew up in, because those parents have been serving their kids and their friends alcohol. Which just is, there's a law in New Jersey that you leave somebody's house drunk, you are the person responsible. So, but we have a lot of open conversations. They know most of the drugs I've done. And of course they can't believe I ever did that. You know, you can't, you can't fathom that your mother did those things, which is good, because if they could fathom, I would probably not be in great shape.
Right.
Yeah.
It's true. That's true. Something I often think about with my little ones, which is like, that is going to be, well, hopefully, where that will be, you know, pretty unthinkable for them, but they are also going to grow up knowing that that was a big part of their parents' lives. Like that's going to be, you know, a big part of this. And it's an interesting thing. You listened to Melinda's episode talking about ACA. What were some of your revelations with regard to that? Well,
I have just started, actually before the pandemic, going to ACA, and I feel, gosh, the laundry list of 14 attributes, I think I have 12 of them, and that really kind of hit me over the head. ACA is going to be my new place to go. Not that I won't go to AA meetings, but I really have found a place that explains all my behaviors and all my thinking from the earliest age, you know, maybe 2 or 3 stories that have been told about behaviors that I had. And, you know, I know we're not supposed to say who else is an alcoholic but ourselves. I would bet that, though, I will say my father's been gone a long time. He was a very controlled drinker, and he had some of the thinking and behaviors and attitudes, I would say, of an alcoholic. And that just makes me know that ACA is the place for me. My mother, much less so, but I also believe that they may have been the product of some kind of addiction or mental health. I know that there have been people distant family have killed themselves, bipolar. So, I totally believe that this runs through families, and I happen to be the one who got it in our little world. So, but ACA is, in my mind, kind of groundbreaking. And I don't think I could have done it early on in sobriety. I just had to stay sober. And now at this point, yeah.
For people who don't know, ACA is Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families.
Yes. And I've been talking it up with lots of people, even people whose parents weren't alcoholic. Wow, what an amazing program.
And that's the dysfunctional, I think they added that piece, which was, the dysfunctional families piece, because they were finding there were lots of people whose parents weren't straight alcoholics, who there was a lot of relation to what was going on. And this looks at things like intergenerational trauma, where, someone's experience that has not been processed and dealt with, that is passed on from generation to generation. And there's a theory that it comes out in the alcoholic. So the trauma comes down, it's not dealt with, and then it hits the alcoholic, and the alcoholic basically processes it through addiction and brings the whole family to its attention. And it either dies with them, or they process it, or they get sober, or any of those number of things happen. But that person is forcing through their addiction, that person is forcing the attention on this, thing that's been passed down. And it sounds very woo-woo, but I've seen it, and it really does, stuff that is not dealt with is carried down in some way, shape, or form, often unknowingly, to the, other generations. And so much of what I love about being sober is this opportunity to try to stop that cycle. I'm sure I'm just creating a new one. I'm just giving them new stuff to carry down generation to generation. I'm like, but it won't be the old stuff. So that's what matters. But yeah, I think it gives us that opportunity, or at least to have those conversations and the skills to have those conversations. What are you doing now?
I just want to go back and say, I think once you have children, you will do anything, as long as you're not in active addiction, to not pass bad things on. I grew up, children should be seen and not heard. A matter of fact, in my fourth step, I had to put that as one of the institutions in the, AA fourth step, because that was always said to me, children should be seen and not heard.
Can I just say that my children did not get that memo at all whatsoever? I hear about that. I'm like, how does that even, I'm just curious how that even works, let alone whether, anyway, yeah.
It's so old school. I really believe it's a product of the 20s, 30s, and 40s, which is, my parents, when they were brought up. So yes. And so I did let my kids be heard and seen. And I'm hoping that, that all worked out well. So here I am in Denver with this new master's degree, and I am working towards being a licensed clinical social worker. And I have gone back a bit into a business that I had started 5 years ago called Mindful Style, where I went into people's closets, mostly women, to help them remove all the excess clothes that many people have. Often a woman will have 10, 12 pairs of black pants. We just start right there. You don't need that much. And remove the things, and then learn how to put the clothes back together. And from that platform, I currently have something called a closet curation challenge going on Facebook, where you pay a sum and you follow me daily for 10 days, what I have recorded, how to go through your closet. And you then post your pictures of what you've done on a daily basis. We get together, we talk about it, because it can be really hard to remove things. If you're attached to stuff, selling, giving away, anything can be really hard. And I help you do that. And from that group, I'm really helping to find some people that might need my services with compulsive shopping, sort of to cull the people that have to go a step further. So it is very exciting. And then my long range goal is to really help compulsive behaviors, probably remotely, since it seems like this will be the way of the world for a while, and or remain the way of the world. And starting with shopping, but there are a number of other process addictions that are crazy making too. From gaming, online gaming, gambling, sex, food. Oh, I actually have something that I do want to add, because this is sort of my joking way to explain what cross addiction is. And that is once you're a person with a compulsive behavior or an addiction, you tend to find that you have other compulsive behaviors or addictions. And what I like to say to my clients is it's like a shell game. And those who aren't from or haven't been in New York City to see a shell game, I'll explain it a little differently. And that is that, let's say you have alcoholism and drug addiction, and you put them in two garbage cans. And let's say you have your compulsive shopping in the third garbage can. But on any given day, you only have two tops to the garbage cans. And you're always trying to cover up and work with one of those addictions. And it takes years, and it has really taken me years to not have any of them flaring up. And at this point, I don't believe I have any flare-ups. But it is, once our minds have that way of being, I think it is very hard to give up things completely.
Absolutely. Oh, I know what I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you, what are your favorite venues for people selling their clothing?
Well, it depends on what kind of clothing. Certainly designer clothes. Gosh, there's a lot of places, The Real, Vestiaire, First Dibs, and then other brands like J. Crew and Madewell and Gap. You can go to a place called Poshmark. All do it on your phone. You literally open up the app and you take a picture, and it's out in the internet, and it's amazing how quickly people buy. And there are several of those. My daughter is selling some clothes right now on Bepop. I think it's called BEPOP. And you literally print your shipping label and they're gone. And of course, any way not to buy new things is right up my alley, because there's so much out there. So many clothes have been manufactured in the last 25 years that it's really a shame. And then, of course, to give away clothes, I love the places like back in New Jersey, Vietnam vets would come and pick them up, and muscular dystrophy will come and pick them up, and you just leave them at your front door with a little sign on it and a bag, and they're whisked away. What happens to recycled clothes is a completely other topic, which would take another session to do, which I won't say any more about. But it really is important for us to look at how much we consume and where things are going in this day and age. And I think that possibly with COVID, online shopping compulsivity is off the charts. So I think this is the time to talk about it.
Yeah. Are there compulsive for people who are looking for support groups, compulsive shopping support groups?
Interestingly, in the 12-step world, Debtors Anonymous is the closest thing, and it is effective. I have only been to one meetings of Debtors Anonymous. There are, on Facebook, I know you can find some groups. There are the real extreme groups like the minimalist groups, which is not what I do with my clients. It doesn't mean you can only own, 3 t-shirts. You can own more than that, especially if you've already paid for it and it looks good on you. But I do believe that this is an area that I'm just dying to get into and start multiple programs, because with COVID, I just keep hearing people are drinking like fish from home, and they're shopping like, yeah.
Yep. They absolutely are. It's interesting. It's, there's also the idea of scale, right? Like something can be an outrageous purchase for someone who so, something can be outrageous depending on how much money you have and depending on what your resources are. And it could be outrageous for one and not for the other. And so, it's kind of like in Overeaters Anonymous or some of the food addiction groups, it's not always black and white. It's not always black and white. I mean, God, I'll never forget. I went to Las Vegas with a man I know who comes from a billionaire family, and he put a hand down. We went to a poker, and I don't like gambling. So it's just not my thing. I want to know what I'm buying. I want to get something for every dollar. Yeah. I'm like, why would I? No, that's not fun. And he put $100,000 down and lost it in one hand. And I couldn't it was too, and it was interesting because for him, that's just, if you look at how much money he has, it's just, it's just not a lot. It's just not a lot for him, but it was a lot for me. And it was too difficult. And so I always think of that example because our internal responses are just so different. And if I had done that exact same thing, right, that would have been a completely reckless thing. And for him, it just wasn't reckless. It was indulgent, but maybe not reckless. And so I think there's a lot of gray and people, it looks different on different people, and you have to take that into account. And so I think there's a lot of room for evaluation around this stuff. And I also think, shopping is very different now that you can go online and get exactly what you need and what you're looking for. And I don't know if that makes it better or worse. Sometimes, I think sometimes better in that you're not walking by something. Sometimes worse in that all the algorithms, if the social dilemma has come out and it's telling us all about how it's all watching what we're doing. So I think there's just a lot of space that would help people, that you have, a place to help people figure this stuff out, and even in ways that are new, that we've never seen before. And kind of what I've been talking about a lot lately is like, nobody has a COVID playbook, nobody has right? Like nobody has a COVID parenting playbook. Nobody has a COVID school playbook, a sobriety playbook, we don't have this playbook. And so as scary as it is, it also, for me, it provides some grace with, look, we're all learning how to do this together. There's no tried and true pandemic, roadmap here. And the way that our compulsions are coming out is they're still there. They're still the same ones, but they're going to start to show up differently. And so those of us who've been doing this a long time, it's almost a place for us to show our expertise and show up and help people, because we are improvising with new information, right? We know how to get people through a lot of the things that have been going on for decades, and a lot of the, this is what you do when you go to work, or this is, what you do. And we know how to stay sober in those circumstances.
Living sober.
Yeah. We know how to do that. We know how it's pretty even, we have a lot of that. This is our time to show that our skills work even when no one's ever done it before. And I think that is where Mindful Style, your business and what you're doing, is going to be a huge, huge service to a lot of people.
Well, a couple things that just struck me while you were talking, and that is that before COVID, shopping was a sport in this country. People go to malls on Saturday and Sunday and walk around. It had become a sport. Now that has pretty much been pulled out from under us, certainly for now. But hey, let's go to the mall and see what's there. And that is a real, in the last 35-year kind of thing. And I believe it probably comes from World War II and previous to that. I think we're a country that feels important when we have a lot. It's just our mentality. The other thing I wanted to say is, so in terms of Mindful Style, I am using some pieces of AA, and I'm using some pieces of CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, to help people. And it is really hard with shopping and eating because you still have to do those two things. which kind of alludes to what you were saying, this gray area. When you stop drinking and drugging, you stay away from the bar, the liquor store, the drug dealer. When you are trying to control your shopping and or your eating, you still have to go to a store to buy some things, and you still have to eat something.
So as someone who struggles with eating and has been to a lot of meetings about this, someone said something to me because I was saying the exact same thing. And they said something that it just burned in my brain, which is this. I was saying, well, it's really hard because when I quit drugs and alcohol, I just stopped, blah, blah. I didn't have to interact with them 3 times a day. And, I don't have to drink. And she said, yes, you do. You have to drink water. You have to drink. And I was like, yeah, you're right. She's like, you don't have to drink alcohol. And I said, well, yeah, but I have to eat 3 times a day. And she goes, well, do you have to eat alcoholic foods? She's like, are you eating heads of lettuce? Are you struggling because you're eating, right? You're eating the whole farmer's market. Is that what's happening? Well, no. Right. And she said, she's like, it's not true that you do have to continue to drink. You just don't have to drink alcohol. You do have to continue to eat, but you can stop eating alcoholic foods. And I think this thing, and this may be a little bit different, but I know that I'm not overbuying, although this is actually in the pandemic. I was going to say overbuying toilet paper. You're not overbuying toilet paper or whatever, and for some people that may or may not be the case. But I think there's gray area, but there's specific, more salient things that we do. And when I think about that, because for me, that's a big thing that I tell myself, well, it's different. It's harder because I have to eat 3 times a day. And that whole, no, you still have to drink. You just don't have to drink alcohol. You still have to eat. You don't have to eat the alcoholic foods that cause you to eat 10 of them. You're not eating 10 heads of lettuce. That's not what's happening. So I wonder, if that there's some amount of, yes, it's gray, but I also think that there are certain things that are just more triggering for people than others, that fill that void more than others. And, clothes, how we look, certain things that other people are going to see in some way, shape, or form, those are likely to be things that are more, that we're going to buy more of, or that speak to us, and that it's not as complicated as we like to make it, I think.
Well, I think that is a great point. And it really is about making choices and coming from the scarcity thinking. Scarcity thinking is why we bought all that toilet paper. If I am enough and I am filled, then, all those carbs aren't going to make me feel a different way. And all those fancy shoes aren't going to make me feel a different way. And that makes a lot of sense to me. I did find that we had a fancy supermarket near our house called King's, and I would go there and I would overshop there too.
Yes.
And we wouldn't necessarily eat it, but it would be shoved back in the pantry. And I'd be like, oh, why the heck did I buy that, a month later?
Right.
There is something powerful about shopping and spending money. Yeah. And I
excess.
Yep. It is excess. More.
Yep. Well, it has been amazing having you on here, and people can go to mindfulstyle.com. Where's the best place?
www.mindfulstyle.com.
And are you on social media?
I'm all over social media, particularly Instagram and Facebook, but I'm Twitter, and I'm posting a lot these days again, and I give tips and I give things to think about, next time you go shopping, so you can kind of start to get into that mindset of, what is it that I'm really trying to do here every time I buy something that I might possibly not need.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Ashley.
This podcast is sponsored by lionrock.life. Lionrock.life is a recovery community offering free online support group meetings, useful recovery information, and entertainment. Visit www.lionrock.life to view the meeting schedule and find additional resources. Find the joy in recovery at lionrock.life.